One Night at the Opera. Chapter 3. The opera hall was shrouded in sleep. The venerable boxes and balconies entwined with bizarre bas-reliefs were asleep. The stalls dozed, lined with rows of carved chairs upholstered in scarlet velvet. Somewhere in the immense heights, a grandiose chandelier swayed and jingled rhythmically. It consisted of numerous rows of figured crystal plates, and the spirits of the candelabra were now dancing around it, making the chandelier constantly sway. The crimson curtain was also swaying. Here, in this opera, everything was predominantly crimson and gold. Only the marble columns supporting the first rows of balconies, the wallpaper on the farthest walls, and the blue sky with white painted clouds differed from the crimson gold range. It was the main one for the main hall, and even the mahogany of the floor fit in perfectly with this palette. However, the boards of the stage were light. A light golden glow of spotlights hovered over the stage, but there was no one there yet. Just like in the incredibly numerous seats that were just beginning to fill up. People were coming into the hall and taking their seats, but for now I could appreciate its empty spaces in all their beauty. The balcony floors, of which there were 6, were decorated with sculptures of lamps depicting the most beautiful naked maidens. The vaults were painted with magical colors, so that snow-white clouds really did float along them. And between the clouds, lion-maned chimeras were jumping and growling. They were trying to catch the spirits of the candles, but they couldn't reach the 3-dimensional flying babies with their 2-dimensional paws. I myself walked past the towering amphitheater, going back in rows, into the depths, and went to the very first rows of the stalls. What's most curious is that no one gave me any tickets. Perhaps I was entitled to a well-deserved place in the very first rows, or perhaps a participant in magical trials is not entitled to any place at all. I did not know for sure, but I modestly sat down in the 3rd row, and the spectators sat around me. Some had masks on their faces. The silence of the hall was habitually filled with a muffled, indistinct hubbub. The audience continued to talk. One rabbit sitting nearby took a beautiful watch on a chain from his waistcoat pocket, and I spied that it was already midnight. And indeed, somewhere the clock chimes struck, and the people immediately fell silent. My familiar master of ceremonies came out on stage, and after a theatrical pause, declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Great Opera is pleased to welcome you to another celebration of magic. Today we will have the opportunity to witness the unforgettable adventures of the chosen hero participants. Yes, here they are, please get up, do not linger." They let me out of the rows and asked me to go up on stage with the others. I didn't remember exactly who else was standing in the rows of participants. There were a couple of knights, a couple of ninjas, some animal-headed or winged guys. People in wizard robes. And me in my jacket or kaftan and fancy old-fashioned trousers. They introduced me simply by my name, Tobian, and asked me to go backstage right away. There I was quickly squeezed in from both sides by some winged succubus demonesses who didn't want to let me go anywhere. But the master of ceremonies, who arrived in time and cleared the stage for the first performers, helped me free myself and ordered me to go take my place again. Only this time not in the stalls, but in the 5th box. Where I went together with a catwoman who looked like an upright panther from a cartoon. We sat down and watched the show together. And this is what we got to see. The first act was a firefly extravaganza. When the curtain rose, a forest glade opened up on the stage, filled with soft moonlight. Suddenly, little fairies dressed in shining dresses emerged from the shadows. Each of them held a magical glowing wand, and on cue, they waved them. The forest filled with shimmer, and the fireflies began to dance in the air, creating mesmerizing patterns of light and shadow. At one point, the fireflies lined up in the shape of a starry sky, and the audience could see even the most distant constellations, which seemed closer than ever. The second act was water mosaics. After a short pause for a quick magical redecoration, it transported the audience to a stage decorated like a huge water canvas. In the center stood a magic fountain, from which jets of water flew up into the air, forming endless patterns. Dancers in elegant costumes, like water nymphs, moved among the jets, and each of their poses evoked new forms, fantastic fish, floral swirls and even entire landscapes. Music, reminiscent of the murmur of a brook, harmonized with the movement of the water, creating the illusion of living and breathing art. The third number, flying paintings. Here the stage was transformed into a huge museum, where the paintings came to life. At first, the audience saw fantasy paintings hanging on invisible walls. Then, to everyone's surprise, the heroes of the paintings began to emerge from their frames. They smoothly moved across the stage, like living characters. For example, Renaissance ladies began to dance to the music, and characters from impressionistic paintings floated up in the colors of a blurred background. At some point, the paintings themselves began to change colors and storylines, turning the entire hall into a gallery of continuous, dynamic works of art. The fourth number was Sound Dreams. The stage was transformed into a giant music box, and sounds became visible. Sound waves manifested themselves as bright, colorful waves and swirls that shimmered across the stage. Musicians in feathered hats played invisible instruments, and the sounds of their playing materialized in the form of dancing sparks. The leather gloves they wore turned into magical instruments that emitted sounds and light, creating the illusion of musical rains, streams and spirals. The fifth number was Gravity Ballet. It presented a stage where the rules of gravity were changed. Dancers dressed in sparkling costumes began to perform an aerial ballet, hovering in the air and seeming to glide along invisible paths. Their movements were so smooth and graceful that it seemed as if they were not just dancing, but floating through space. At some point, they began to interact with the heavenly bodies, and the audience saw how the stars from the sky descended to them, creating magical light lines and patterns that merged into an incredible spectacle. And then, the audience gasped. The grand finale of the first act of the performance was the appearance of the opera mistress herself. The White Queen honored the audience with her personal presence this evening. She appeared as a small, but ever-growing, fireball that reached a meter in diameter. A blazing fiery sphere formed above the stage with hissing and flashes. Then, arms and legs began to appear from it, like protuberances. A head emerged, and a fiery crown on this head. The fire smoothly stopped blazing everywhere, but concentrated in a thin fiery halo around the woman. She herself, up to 4 meters tall, was dressed in a luxurious white dress. In lace, sprinkled with sparkling diamonds, in crystal slippers, the queen measured her subjects with her gaze. She also greeted the hall, but was laconic. Although her voice sounded enchanting, bewitching, melodic. It wanted to obey immediately, unquestioningly, whatever she commanded. And she simply commanded to relax and enjoy. The spectators, the spectacles, the heroes, the adventures themselves. And only after this, when the White Queen retired to her place of honor at the very end of the amphitheater, where for her, as in a separate box, a royal throne of suitable size was installed, then I myself was able to continue contemplating. And after the second act, not allowing me to wait any longer, a pair of succubi grabbed me again, this time not flirting, but escorting me to the place where my personal opera adventure began.